On this episode of the Theatre Rant with Chris Peterson, we are hitting the reset button, ladies and gentlemen. We're starting anew, fresh, new attitude, new everything, new logo, new technology, as you can hear. Very exciting stuff. And we're going to be talking about all things Broadway today. We're going to be talking at what the musical theater season is looking like for the upcoming year. We're also going to be taking a look at BroadwayCon and discussing the genius move that they made in preparations for this year's event. And also, I got a question for you folks. What was the greatest year in Broadway musical history? Because I got some thoughts on that. So we're going to talk about all of that and a lot more right here today on the Theatre Rant with Chris Peterson. Let's get it going. Alrighty. Welcome. As you can hear, folks, from, I guess you could call it the difference in sound quality, I hope. We're starting fresh here at the Theatre Rant with Chris Peterson. We're changing the title. We're doing everything. And just like I did with the first episode, which you can see on Facebook, which I did a terrible job of recording on a Facebook Live video, we are starting a brand new style of doing these things. And I went ahead and I got a lot of software. I got a lot of different microphones. I got a lot of different sound mixing technology. We are good to go now. And we're going to launch forward very aggressively when it comes to these podcasts. And I'm going to do these once a week at least. If I do more episodes per week, you will certainly know ahead of time, but I am definitely going to be doing at least one, and I'm very, very excited about that. Lot to talk about. Got a brand new logo, as you can see here. Couple different ways that you can listen and actually even watch this podcast. So obviously we're going to put the audio feed up on our webpage. It's going to be up eventually on all the different, podcasting networks out there, whether it's SoundCloud, Podbean, Spotify, obviously Apple, eventually iTunes. You can listen to this. That's the plan. But right now you can listen to it exclusively in an audio form on our website at onstageblog.com. Just click on the podcasts section because eventually I want to have at least 7 to 8 different podcasts on that station. That is definitely the plan. So it will be more than just me talking. But also, you can listen to us on Facebook, where you can actually watch kind of a semi-quasi video feed of this podcast as well, because you can see some images of the subjects that we're talking about and things like that. So if you want a little bit more of a visual presentation, if you're sitting at home, sitting at your desk, whatnot, want to follow along on screen, you absolutely can do that as well. So we're going to have a couple different things. So that video will exclusively be put on Facebook. Probably put it on the webpage too. So those are the two definite places you can listen to this podcast. But yeah, so if you're driving home, driving to work, on the train, on the subway, and you want to listen to us, again, you can listen to in just pure audio, or you can follow along via video on Facebook, as well as probably YouTube and also our own website. So a lot to talk about. As you can see, we changed the title of the show. Originally, it was going to be called The Editor's Desk with Chris Peterson, but then I realized, especially through the comments of my friends, that doesn't really describe what I'm trying to do here and what this podcast is going to be all about, because it doesn't mention once theater. So it would be very confusing for people to tune in and, thinking that they're going to get maybe a news show or things like that, and not that at all. So, there are so many theater podcasts. When I say the market is saturated with theater podcasts, I really mean it. There's a lot, because I actually went up and looked at like a glossary of theater terms to kind of come up with a title for this show, from treading the boards to breaking legs to half hour call. Every conceivable idiom, saying, quote you can think of when it comes to theater, there is a podcast already out there with that in mind. And I certainly do not want to take someone else's title from them. So that is not going to happen. So I kind of just went the obvious route and said, what am I actually going to be doing on this show? And 90% of the time it's going to kind of be like a rant. So you've got the Theatre Rant with Chris Peterson, and that's the title going forward, at least for the foreseeable future. If I change my mind down the road, we'll see. But right now, the Theatre Rant with Chris Peterson, I think, is a pretty good title, and I think it's pretty self-explanatory of what this show is going to be, aiming to be different than any other theater-based podcast. Period. Because again, like I said on our first episode of that terrible recorded Facebook Live video, we are going to be unfiltered, uncensored, and unapologetic here. And you're going to hear some pretty brash opinions. You're going to hear some confrontational language, depending upon who the target is, as well. But like I said before, I'm not going to attack anybody unfairly. If I call out any individual, a theater, a show, any of this kind of stuff, it's always within reason, and I promise I will make those reasons clear. But let's talk about what we're going to get to on this edition, episode number 2, or you could say episode number 1. I mean, this is kind of like the reset button, so to speak, one episode in. I think when we do years of these podcasts, we'll look back on this first couple episodes and kind of laugh at, where we were. So again, let's get into it. Here's tonight's topics. First of all, I would be remiss if I didn't mention Mary Maisie and her amazing achievements and just absolutely devastating passing this past week. But also going to touch on that, in addition to touching on this whole issue and controversy over the dimming of the lights of marquees of Broadway theaters. And we'll get into that because I got some thoughts about how ridiculous this whole process has become. Also, we're going to talk about Broadway musicals this year coming to Broadway. What does that situation look like? What's the outlook for the Broadway musical for 2018-19? Because, again, I've got some thoughts. We've had a couple shows open already. How is this year's Tony race going to shape up? We're going to dive into that. Also, BroadwayCon. It's coming up in January. It's creeping up. Panels are being announced. Guests are being announced. It's getting exciting. But one thing that BroadwayCon did this year was absolutely genius. And we're going to be talking about that today as well on the podcast because, again, credit is deserved. And we'll talk about that. And then finally, I got a question for you folks. What do you think was the best year for Broadway musicals? And I'm not talking about musical theater, the art form. I'm talking about New York City, 42nd Street musical productions. What was the best year in the history of that? We're going to dive in because I got some ideas and some candidates that I think you might be interested in. So we'll discuss and debate that as well. But let's kick things off by unfortunately talking about the sad, tragic passing of Mary Maisie to ovarian cancer after an amazing, brave fight and battle with the disease. Folks, if you don't know who Mary Maisie is, just go listen to Ragtime right now. I mean, it's on YouTube. You can listen to the entire score on YouTube. Just go listen to it. Go download it on Spotify. Just listen to her singing the role of mother. And if that doesn't engage you or engross you or move you in any way, you're a robot. That's plain and simple. You're a robot. Same thing for Passion, which I think when we talk about the great Sondheim musicals of all time, nobody seems to put Passion in like the top 2 or 3. I think it's right up there. I think in terms of score, lyrics, content, presentation, it's right up there with Sweeney Todd. It's up there with it's there, folks. It really is. It's one of the great musicals of all time, and I think underrated. I think it doesn't get its due when we talk about the great musicals. And a big reason of that was Mary Maisie. Here's a woman that was nominated for 3 Tonys in 6 years. Didn't win any of them, unfortunately. I believe she deserved at least one. but that's astounding. That's a run. Okay. She was also in some of the biggest shows. I mean, she was a replacement in Into the Woods. I mean, she was a replacement in Next to Normal. She actually ended up closing that show. Um, I will put it out there, and I will say from all of these different, you know, uh, accolades and praise that we want to heap upon Mary Maisie, the big thing for me is, and I said this in a Facebook post right after I heard the news, if we're equating her to or equating theater to sports in any way, she is the greatest relief pitcher of all time. She is the Mariano Rivera for Broadway stars. I mean, I think she only originated a handful of characters. She was only in terms of original productions. But my God, I mean, she came in and just crushed it and closed these shows on a high note. Whether it was Spamalot, whether it was Next to Normal, whether it was Man of La Mancha, Into the Woods, incredible run of just, if you needed someone to come in to replace your marquee star or something like that and end this show on a high note, Mary Maisie. And I would even venture forth by saying that she had one of the most distinct voices over the past 30 years. I mean, anytime that you heard her on a recording, you listened to her in a concert, whatever it was, I mean, that voice was, you could pick it out. You're like, oh, that's Mary Maisie. And what a beautiful voice it was. I often joke that growing up, if I could sing like a woman, I would want Mary Maisie's voice because it was natural sounding. It was sweet. She had power in reserve, and when she let it go, holy shit! I mean, she could belt with the best of them, and she could riff too. I mean, I saw her in Spamalot by accident. I just happened to be in the theater that day. First Broadway show I took my future wife to, by the way. So kicked off things on a high note with that relationship. And Mary Maisie was there. She was right there playing the Lady of the Lake. And that's a tough, and for anybody who's sang that role, who's listened to that cast recording with Sarah Ramirez, that's a hard freaking part. I mean, you've got to have power. You have to be able to riff. And she did it. In a different way too. I mean, I think when you're coming into that role, you cannot imitate what Ramirez did with that part. You got to kind of make it your own. And Maisie did that. And it's such a sad passing because she was only 57 years old, which is not old for Broadway standards. I mean, God, with her health, obviously with cancer, but notwithstanding, she had plenty of more years to produce work and do amazing work and whatnot. So, just absolutely devastating on that end. But she was a giant in this community, which is proof because of how much the community is outpouring for her and for her husband Jason, who's also an amazing actor in his own right. And they did some just incredible performances together. I mean, may we all find love in our lifetime like Jason Delaney and Mary Maisie did. Just incredible pair to watch. But she was a giant. And, as the passing of any, Broadway superstar, legend, whatever adjective you want to use to describe someone of that stature, one of the things that becomes discussed is how does Broadway pay tribute to that? And the one tribute that they seem to do is dimming the lights of Broadway theater marquees for 1 minute. And unfortunately, what should be a beautiful, emotional, poignant tribute always seems to be marred by who gets this honor and who doesn't. And is the honor poignant enough? Should it be one theater? Should it be 5 theaters? Should it be all the theaters, all 41 of them? And who gets to decide that? Well, it's a complicated thing that we still have never gotten an ironclad answer on. A lot of